Hey, all right. Welcome to the Big Story Podcast, where we have great conversations with amazing creators. I'm Alex Morrissey, and today we have a coffee-sipping dynamo, Kelly Sue DeCONNIck.
Hello, friends.
Good to have you. Thank you for coming on, and we are going to get into it.
All right, let's go.
It's funny because we've had we've had some of your co-conspirators on Historia. We had Phil Jimenez on, as well as I think Jean is.
Yeah.
So it was pretty exciting because I've known Phil since the late 80s, maybe.
Yeah.
1990. He went to SVA when I was in SVA or art school, and he's super close friends with a very close friend of ours, Jeff Jensen, the writer.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, and so Phil is a great guy, and then we had Jean on, and then Jean's like, "Oh, I'm taking over for Phil," so I thought that was great.
Yeah,
so that's big stuff. So
and then you got to get Nicholas Scott on next because she'll follow Jean on book 3.
All right, we'll make it happen.
And then you got everybody.
Collect them all.
That's right.
It's not just get the comics, but get the people. That's the new model.
True nerdy fashion.
Yeah, right, exactly. I guess that's sort of like what we were talking about, getting obsessive about the things that you get just all in. So where are you? I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, in the lovely mountains in the Appalachian. Where are you in this country?
I am in Portland, Oregon. I'm actually in unincorporated Multnomah County, so I'm just outside the city, but in the Portland metro area.
Yeah, I love Portland. It's really such a great place to go and visit. I have family out in Oregon, so the terrible thing of having to fly into Portland and stay a day or two before you go down and visit them.
Oh, terrible. Poor you.
It's the worst. If only they lived in Bend, it could be a 1-2 perfection for me. It would be just one after another. But sadly, they're on the other side of the mountains. So you write, and you write a lot. So
and still not enough. How about that?
Well, it's. I mean, I do prose writing, and it's like so daunting because the projects are so long, and you just sit there and look at the ever-growing list of the next thing that you want to do, and it just never stops because creativity only breeds more creativity. So is it the same problem for you?
Yeah. I a lot of my own making, I overcommit. And if you're doing something as a solo artist, then if you miss a deadline, the next person in the line is you, and you will forgive yourself.
Right.
But if you've made commitments to collaborators on comics and you miss a deadline, you affect their paycheck.
No, and their life.
Yeah.
It's the in working in different various sort of businesses over the years, you have this interesting thing where sometimes you're at the beginning of the train and other times you're at the end of the train, and it's really interesting how you say that. I mean, by theory, there's probably more people in the comic industry angry with writers than anybody else in the racket, just because the colorist and the letterer and the penciler and the inker have all sitting around waiting. Hey, when are we going to get started? But
we're the first domino. So when we're late, we set everybody else back.
Yep.
And then these days we get more of the credit and attention. So we're rightly the villains in that.
Well, it's it's interesting. My creative career started off penciling for Marvel and DC, and this was in the early 90s, so I had this sort of, I think, I guess it was the time that the artist was kind of was king at that moment, just because the image guys were just about to break off. So they had their sort of world of, amazingness, what's going on.
Right.
But, and when I ventured into the advertising and design world, was teaching, and they were talking with the writers all the time, and I kept yelling at the art direction students. I'm like, no, you guys are the real thing. But it all came down to the writing, because it was the idea. Like, the idea was the thing that sold the ad campaign. It wasn't the visual. So
yeah, I mean, my favorite way to work in this artist writer model is very, very collaborative.
Yeah.
So so I don't think either one of those breakdowns is super accurate. I think if we're, the way I like to work, if we're doing it right, it creates this kind of third authorial voice that is a different thing from either the artist or the writer. And that, and that's why, like, a book that I do with Phil is very different from a book that I do with Emma Rios, is very different from a book that I do with Valentine DeLandro, is very different from a book that I do with Jean Ha, and so on and so forth. And so, like, I understand why, and we want to make sure that everyone's work is being credited and acknowledged, but really, to give either of the two collaborators in that role, nope, it's sort of this third thing.
Yeah. I guess that really is super, like, clear, because you're looking at something that the vision of the person typing out the words on the paper, and then that vision is reinterpreted by another person in a visual sense. So now we see how does this come out, and the sort of Venn diagram, that overlap is what we get in the process, and then we add other creators into the process, even sort of enriching that vision. Did you, like, on monthly books, like, how do you feel like the sort of collaborative process is different than sort of a project book, where you have more of a timeline?
It's interesting because monthly books are such a machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the train has to leave the station every 30 days. Folks are just not used to working really collaboratively.
Right.
And in fact, sometimes this thing happens where, I reach out to the artist, like, hey, do you want to talk about this scene? Is there anything, what's going on? What do you want to talk about? What is interesting to you here? How do you feel? Like, do you want any changes? Or whatever. And they will kind of interpret my reaching out as my being like, where's Pages? Right. And if you're listening to this, I just pointed at my watch.
Yeah.
And so, and that's actually not my intent at all. That's the editor's job. And I am a slow writer, so I will never be it would be the most hypocritical thing in the world for me to be like, excuse me, pick it up. Like, no, right. You will never hear that from me. Right. So when I reach out, I'm genuinely wanting thoughts and ideas, and some people are super into it and really responsive to that. And we kind of, and what I'm trying, like, the way I try to explain it is that I like a collaborator who wants to play. Like, you want to play? Let's play. Like, what are the ideas that we're interested in? I kind of feel like what I'm giving you in the script is my sense of the story. So I'm giving you the plot, and then I'm giving you the aural, and I'm pointing at my ear, AUR, aural and emotional rhythm of the story. And then it's for the artist then takes that and adds the visual rhythm and the visual expression of emotion, which very often we're getting into coloring now too, because coloring is so tied to our emotions.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that speak directly to the reader. I only speak directly to the reader in dialogue, which is the smallest part of the script that I write.
Right.
So most of the script that I write is a letter to the artist and the creative team. The dialogue, that gets to the reader, is like the tiniest bit of that. So it's, ideally, by the time this makes it to print, it is a conversation that has evolved from the ideas of everyone involved. But when it's, the monthly grind, often people don't have time for that. They don't want to hear from you. I have the script. Thank you. I will handle it from here. And you're like, okay, that's fine too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately that clock, the ticking of that clock is driving a lot of people's, focus. But I think I love that beautiful sort of idea of the, all the parties involved and how that can come, because we all know inherently those comics that we've seen, and I'm sure, and everything else. I mean, in music, or if it's film or whatever, when the people who are putting these things together are so, creatively invested in it, you can really, really sense the difference. And I think that's a huge thing. And I think it's a very strong position to start, your work from, because, and it as you said, it's not always going to come out that way, but if you come at it from that point of view, you're going to get there, more often than not, if you're not coming from that position. So I think that's great. So, like, we're peer aged, but I was, obsessed with comic books, growing up, and went, straight line into the most lucrative business I could find, which was drawing comic books. And but like, it doesn't look like you were sort of like charging into it when you were young. So like, were comics part of your growing up, or were they a sort of a discovery, or how did they come into your focus?
Yeah. So I grew up on Air Force bases all around the world, and we are similarly aged. And so this is pre-internet and pre-cable, right? So when I lived in Germany, we got one American television station, and that was the AFRTS station, and it did not have a lot of children's programming. But the Stars and Stripes bookstore on base had a full wall of comics. Cool. This predates the direct market, but they had a direct market like comic newsstand. And they were huge with military culture, which makes a lot of sense if you think about the fact that the dominant genre in American comics has, since the 50s, been superhero comics. And because folks who are in the military, it makes sense that they might be, people who are in service might be drawn to that particular genre. So they were huge. And I would spend part of my allowance on comics at Stars and Stripes, and then I would spend part of my allowance buying stacks of comics from GIs who were shipping out. And I could get those at the base swap meet on the weekends.
There's nothing better when you're young, and if for whatever, and finding like that box, they're like I don't know, like $2. You're like, it's I spent a whole summer, one summer vacation. We were away, and I don't think I brought very many comics with me. And we were at a yard sale, and there was a box of like Archies and Mad magazines. Neither a thing that I was a big reader at the time, but like, they're comics. I'm going to get them and I'm going to read them. And I spent the whole summer just reading and rereading these books over and over again. I still think I still have a bunch of the
man, the little fold thing that you have to
the back.
Yeah.
It was
the best.
And they were all from the 60s. So they were all older than me. Like they were all like from like 65, 64. So it was really kind of cool because I'm like, they're talking about stuff I didn't know, but felt like it was really, and Beatles, like they always like would do a Beatles skit, like,
right, yeah.
Like they were a thing. The Beatles were real, so that's cool. So you're base hopping growing up, and you're and then I guess, were you selling your comics at swap meets or at the end?
No, I don't know what I did with mine. I don't recall having a sense that they had any value.
Right.
Like once I read them, I'd read them, and then the value was to trade them so I could read others that I hadn't read before. The Edmondson family was a family that I used to hang out with when I was a kid. Both my parents worked, and they had a stay-at-home mom, and so a lot of kids would kind of hang out at the Edmondson's house. And all the comics kind of ended up there. Yeah. Like everybody's comics sort of became part of the Edmondson comic library.
Yeah, no, that's so true, because there was a family like I grew up with, and they were, I think there were like 5 kids in the family, and it was just, that was where, like, that was the nexus of culture for me in the 70s. Like they were like, hey, here's what Kiss is, here's albums, and you're like, oh, what is this? And you're in 2nd grade learning all this ridiculous stuff, and they're like, and you're looking through their comic books or whatever the stuff was that the bigger kids had. That magic. And
I think Missy was my age. She was the youngest, and then she had 2 older brothers, and her dad read comics too.
Oh, wow.
So they had everything. And then the oldest brother, whose name I think was Robert, but look, it's been a long time, I don't really remember. We'll call him Robert. Okay. The oldest brother had a lot of music magazines too. So like what was Circus? Was that
Circus was a big one? Yeah.
Yeah. And like there was something 16, something I don't remember the names of them all, but like a lot of, but yeah, when you said Kiss, was like, yes.
Yeah.
And the joke I always make is that I was super into Kiss, like circa 1976 to 1978, because we all were. And I was a member of the Kiss Army. I had sent off and gotten
patch.
Yes. And as I never received any discharge papers.
Oh,
so
you're still in.
As far as I know, I am still enlisted, and I could get called up any moment.
Any moment.
Gene's like 80. So
what?
So I'm ready. If he needs me to step in, I'm here.
I'm here. I'll stretch. I'll do all the exercises. I'll wear the boots. I'm in.
Yes.
I know that Paul is a huge comic book fan. I'm like, one of my goals is try to get him on the show, because I would love to talk comics with him.
If you get him,
you want to co-host?
Yes, because I just finished his book. Behind the Makeup, something.
Yeah, I think something like that.
I feel like I've slaughtered the name of it, but I listened to the audiobook of it, and
Did you read it?
Yeah, and I absolutely loved it. Actually, it's for like I love rock and roll memoirs, and and it's actually smarter and more thoughtful than it has any right to be. Like,
right.
He's a quick dude, very, very savvy, very thoughtful. And the thing is that, like, he's a theater nerd. He's like like you're a drama guy. That explains so much about Kiss.
The Kabuki.
Yeah, like oh right. You know, and he went on to play Phantom in Phantom the Opera too, which is like of course.
I totally forgot that.
Of course you did. Yes.
That's I mean, but that like those guys looked at it and said, okay, what can we do? Like we're 3-chord rock and roll. Like what can we do? And they came up with a thing that just captured the attention of the 70s.
And their live shows, we went to the End of the Road tour and did not take our kids. I've taken the kids to see Iron Maiden, but
nice.
We went with another adult couple for the Kiss show, and I deeply regret not taking the kids because it was a show. It was just one of the best shows I've ever been to in my life. It was fantastic and so good that I almost did something like really extravagant and stupid. And I was like, you know, they're going to LA like in a couple, like next week they're going to be in LA.
Yep.
What if we took the kids and just went to LA and saw the show with them there? Like we got really close.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, that is fiscally irresponsible.
Oh man. I totally know that impulse. That impulse when you go to an amazing show and you're like, you know what, that other one's not. We could get. I think we can go to the next show.
Make this happen.
Like I mean, you can clearly, like, if you can just feel that little feeling in your belly, that one, and you go, yeah, that's why the Grateful Dead existed so well for so long, because everybody felt that and we're like, hey, oh, you're going? Oh, okay, I'll go along too. And next thing you know, 2,000 people are on the road.
If there had been another night, if they'd done another night in Portland, we would have been back with the kids.
Sure. Yeah, why not? Yeah. It's no plane flights involved. That makes sense. Yeah, you can do that. That's so cool. Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, there was something really magical about that period in time, because as you were saying without the magazines, like we didn't know anything about anything. Like we only knew what was put into these magazines or on the liner notes of an album, or in the letters column in the back of a comic book. We didn't know anything about this stuff except for the small little portions that were parsed out by very clever people to keep everybody interested. And now it's like Wikipedia, Kiss, got it. Okay, next thing, and it's like that magic is a little, it's just not as brilliant as it used to be. So I mean, thank heavens for like Damon Albarn to come up with the idea for the Gorillas, like, kind of really turn it on its head for some fun. So so I mean, so then what comics were kind of like hitting your head like that? Like, do you remember as a kid? Like for me, science fiction comics were big. I loved them.
Yeah, I read so Wonder Woman was probably my favorite. Interestingly, I don't think I read any Marvel comics until I was an adult.
Okay.
And I don't remember that being a particular choice I made. I think it was just, it probably came down to the Edmondsons, like they read mostly DC. So I read mostly DC, and, everybody read Archie. And the DC horror anthologies were really big. It was the 70s, so horror was huge.
Yep.
So we all read the DC horror anthologies. I read Vampirella, and all the Wonder Woman and Batman I could get my hands on. And what other? I guess those are the big ones.
Yeah.
That period in my life.
DC was kind of cool, like back in the day. They were really cool because their comics to me felt really genre based. So you had like hey, we got war comic,
right? Yeah.
We got sort of like so we got scary in wide variety of scary stuff, and Batman was like detective stories, I mean, Wonder Woman at times was kind of like mythic, there were these sort of like, oh, that's
1,000%. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was kind of cool in that respect, you know. And Superman was his own sort of like Superman, you know, unto his own. And you know, I mean, I like, was it a Legion of Superheroes? Like it was a bunch of kids. I'm like, these are kids doing weird stuff in space. I'm like, what's happening? A Black Hawk, like all these very cool things. So I think like it gave a wider palette. Like in Marvel, like if you weren't like into fights and tights, well, Marvel didn't seem to offer as many options outside of that.
Yeah. I mean, this was, like I said, I don't remember ever choosing
Right, a brand
or having or like having any preference. I don't remember. I remember Coke and Pepsi wars. I don't remember Marvel DC
yeah,
wars, and there was no, and they didn't seem to be any like, there was no picking of sides, and there was no, I don't know. There was I in my particular circle of comic readers, you know, in my elementary school.
yeah.
So I can't speak to any like huge experience, but you know, I don't remember that being tribal at all.
Right.
I mean, and honestly, I had my favorites, but I would read whatever the next thing on the stack was. Whatever the person sitting on the beanbag to my right was going to hand me that I could read, so I can hand it to the person in the beanbag on the left, I was going to read, you know?
Yeah. No, yeah. Now I'm wishing I was 10 again. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's very cool. I mean, I think that, you know, yeah, I mean, I don't think I really registered any tribalism for a long time. So, preferences, sure, characters kind of bite into your spirit and you hold on.
Yeah, totally.
But you're like, but it's like, yeah, but you don't go like, but I hate that character because it's not his character. You know, who cares? No, were you writing? Because I mean, I was a fiendish pencil scribbler as a kid. So like, were you a writer as a kid or no?
No. And in fact, I mean, I knew I could write. I knew I was proficient with language, kind of, you know, above my grade level, but I didn't for a moment imagine that I could write a story.
Yeah.
I wasn't a like I didn't construct. One day I will finish one of these sentences. Who knows which one? The only memory I have of doing any fiction writing as a kid was I had a spiral notebook where I would kind of make up this ongoing, I don't even remember what it was now. Like it was some kind of ongoing adventure story featuring characters that were kind of named after and based on
other things,
all of my classmates.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, and so we would, you know, I would pass it around and everybody would be excited by what their part in the story was or whatever. But I had no, like, there was no plot planned. There were, you know, there was that is the only fiction writing experience that I remember from young childhood. And I don't remember, I remember feeling good about proclivity with language, but that, like, I don't know how you like just being in awe of anyone that could shape an actual story and having no idea how you would even go about that.
Because but they almost seem like, I mean, because like, you know, what of our how do we engage, you know, stories, you know, in the written form? I mean, there are these hardbound editions that are lined up on shelves in libraries, and they're very formally, you know, treated. And so, I mean, as a kid, it's not hard to kind of go like, I guess you have to be some sort of like wizard, you know, scientist to be the people who make this stuff. And obviously not a kid, because, you know, we all know we're kids.
Right. Or you would have kids that could do it who didn't understand what you found confusing about it.
Oh,
You
okay.
know? And
Sure.
so you were just like, oh, well, you were born to that.
Yeah, that's what you do. I guess
and I can do math.
Yeah.
You know, like that sort of, you know, and then, yeah, and it like, in fact, I remember babysitting at one point when I was a little bit older, and the kids that I was babysitting were really, really interested. I had told them about Dungeons and Dragons, and they were really taken with this. And then, so they wanted me to tell them a Dungeons and Dragons story, so this was just like, make up a story. And
right.
So I would spend all of this time helping them create characters, you know, which I wasn't doing. We had no manuals. This was all from like my understanding, my third-hand understanding of what Dungeons and Dragons was, right? And so we would create the characters, and then I'd just be like, "Oh, you fall asleep before I have to get to the part where I make up a story because I don't know how to do that," you know. And so just be all of this stalling so that we never got to actual adventuring because I had no idea how that was done.
Oh, but in their heads, I'll bet you for those kids in their heads that they did go on these great, like, oh, we had this babysitter and we went and she told us these stories and like, oh, but our characters, you know, like we played that, like they probably conflated this thing to some sort of magical event in their lives and they all became faculty workers and scientists. I don't know, but but it's interesting because like what you're saying is like I'm relating to it because in the sense of like stories and in books, like how I interpreted stories or I expressed stories was kinetically. So I would like, if I was really into whatever it was, I would, you know, I'd grab my superhero toys or my doll, whatever things, and I would make those stories up. Or I would physically be, hey, we're going to go play. Remember that TV show, Man from Atlantis with Bob, you know, Bobby.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't Bobby.
Yeah, Patrick Duffy.
Patrick Duffy, yeah. And like I would like make my neighbors, the three girls who live next door, I would like, we're playing Man from Atlantis, you know, and we like do the whole, we would set up a whole huge thing.
Do kids do that anymore? I don't like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess my daughter, my son's 14, but my daughter and her best friend, they do play pretend. They do. You know what they do? They hilariously, they watch a show that's about the office. And so they play pretend office, which is really very funny.
What amazing aspirations.
Yes.
Like we're all pretending to be like, I'm gonna go be Conan, you know. I mean, a homeless guy running around killing people is not exactly a you know, because that's really what he is. Yeah, but that's interesting. Okay, yeah. I mean, but yeah, I mean, you play, you just do the thing. You're the thing, and so like, but the idea of putting that down on paper, like in the words to make that a story, I think that was something, you know, terrifying to me. I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea how that would even be done, and I didn't venture into that one until desperation hit. You know, in 1991, but so okay, so you're not that thing, but were you reading a lot? Did you? I mean, outside of comics, so like I was thinking Ramona the Brave. I love the Ramona the Brave, but like you reading all these, you know, reading books growing up, like you go off, like what was your self vision of like what this, like where you were headed? Were you thinking creatively or were you thinking?
Yeah, so I read voraciously, and my parents never policed my reading, so I read anything I was interested in, which I really appreciate. And oddly, in third grade, I got really into ancient Greek theater, and I read all the old plays in third grade like a weirdo. And which I think had a lot to do with Wonder Woman, to be honest with you. Yeah. But yeah, the Oresteia, and that was my jam for a long time. And in fact, I did a presentation in maybe fourth or fifth. Mrs. Swingley was fifth. I'm not sure. I can picture the classroom, but I can't remember what teacher it was. So I can't remember what grade it was exactly, but it would be somewhere between third and fifth. I did a independent study project. Because I was on military bases, I got to go to DoD schools, which are very small class sizes and have a lot of advantages that, so we got to do like independent study projects, and the gifted and talented programs at that time were really, really good. But I did a sock puppet reenactment of Agamemnon, like you do.
Of course, everyone does that.
Yeah. So that kind of got me involved and interested in theater, and in particular in classical theater, which remained a big interest of mine. And then I ended up getting into theater in junior high and high school, and that was my focus. I majored in drama as a college student, and then had a concentration in Italian, and went and did a classics and painting program in Italy after graduation.
Oh, that's great.
So
okay, so I mean, it was the focus on Italian. Was that part of the language sort of for you? Like you said that you had a sort of a natural acuity with language. Did that translate into Italian, like into foreign languages?
Yeah. So my dad is multilingual, and I'm not really. I have a little bit of several other languages, but I don't. The closest I ever got to fluency in a second language was Italian, and I didn't quite get there. Right. I could get around Italy and Italian at one time in my life, but it was never so natural to me that I wasn't doing translations in my head. Okay. I think that the flip into fluency is when you are thinking in that second language rather than doing the translation. I never got there. I was always doing the translation. Oh, but yeah, I come from, believe it or not, I come from an Italian American family. And so that was important to me as a connection to my grandmother, but also, Athens and Rome.
Sure. Yeah.
Were the heart of antiquity, which was so important and interesting to me.
I mean, I remember it had been like around 5th or 6th grade is when the sort of the Greek mythology stories kind of came into my world. I mean, I remember having books on those in the house, and my stepfather was a colonel in the army, and so we had a
lot in common.
Yeah, so he had and still does. That was a great library, but of all these history, and it's all this military history. So I would be able to go in there and pull out like all the, look at his books on, Roman conquests or whatever the thing was. And it was just always great to be able to have those things to kind of flesh out like that sort of children's book on, the Trojan War, the Trojan War. Yeah. You're like, oh, okay, cool. But then you're like, oh, and he's like, oh yeah, but there's a whole book on that. You can look at this, and you're like, oh, and then you kind of dig into it. So, so you went the drama route, and so what's like in your self vision of that? Like, are you like, oh, I'm like, I'm going to be on stage. I'm going to be producing. I'm good. Cause it gets like, it's sort of like you can do everything when you're like in high school, because everybody's pitching in and, you're painting the backdrop and you're doing all the stuff.
Yeah.
And then you go to university, it gets a little, little more sectioned, right?
Yeah. Although in my University of Texas Department of Theater and Dance, they really did not allow you to, if you want to, the master's program was for folks who were really digging down and specializing. But you had to take tech classes, you had to take performance classes, you had to take voice. It was not, I am a terrible dancer. I took dance, as little as I could get away with, but I had to do it. My tech, you could specialize in that, like you had to learn some of every tech department, but then, when you started to do multiple tech classes, you could kind of focus. Okay. So I did a lot of costuming and specifically, and I was the only person who was doing this study at the time, but I had one of my professors allowed me to, he what did they, when it's another independent study thing where like the you're the only person taking this class and you and the professor are sort of making up the class as you go along, that kind of thing. So I did makeup and special effects, and costuming were my tech focuses. And then I was an actor on the performance side. And then after college, I did a lot of improv, but I remained a lover of both classical and experimental theater, which was how I really started spending my time after graduation. So I worked with a theater in Austin, Texas called Vortex. Was in played Romeo in I don't know if it was an all-female production, but a largely female production of Romeo and Juliet, and did a lot of projects like the Orpheus Project, where we took the Orpheus myth and divided it into sections and randomly assigned 2 different artists to conceive of a way to tell that section in performance. That kind of thing. And then I moved to New York and did a lot of environmental theater. So plays that were written to be performed in specific locations, like inside a boxing ring that was in a boxing gym, or in a pool on a top of a hotel, or in the middle of a street, like these things.
That's cool. Yeah. I lived in New York for 25 years. So it's just like, that's that type of stuff is everywhere. You just, you don't have to scratch too deeply on the surface to really find that, especially if you're in, the East Village or the Lower East Side. It was pretty predominant in the,
I was in Alphabet City for 10 years.
Sure. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. I mean, you're like sort of in the heart of the beast. And what was the guy who had the theater company in the church on 2nd Avenue and 9th Street? There's there's the old stone church there, right there on the corner.
Yeah.
And David something or other, I think his name was. Really experimental theater, and we used to go there and check out that stuff. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to go to an AA meeting at 2nd and 2nd. Church. I was like, wait, what? 2nd Avenue's church? Like,
right. Yeah, that spot. Yeah, that's so cool. So, I mean, so you were just doing you were doing the New York thing, you were doing the theater thing. And when did you, like, I know that you did a bunch of translation stuff for manga. You were doing manga translation work. And like, I mean, was that sort of like, oh, I love comic books? Like, were you like, was that
No,
just?
it was, I'm a struggling actor in New York City,
Yeah.
and I need to have 19 jobs because it's incredibly expensive to pay for my tiny room. You know, that I share with 5 other people off of First Avenue at one point. You know, like it's my place on Second between C and D. The guy that was on that lease had been dead for 10 years. You know, like that kind of like, so you know, you do anything for a paycheck at that point. And so I worked at as a dresser backstage at the fashion shows. I was a cater waiter. I was I did makeup. I did touring improv shows at colleges up and down the coast, you know, like just anything to pay for my experimental theater habit. And I still read comics, and the internet was kind of a new thing at that point. And so I found some posting boards for bands that I liked and for comics that I like. And that was kind of how I found the 2 major friend groups that became, you know, some of those folks are still really important parts of my life today. Many of them in the comics realm are very important parts of my life today. That my colleagues and my husband, you know, I met through these fan sites, really. And then it became, you know, on the fan site, it was like, well, you know, we're putting together an anthology. Who wants to, you know, take a shot at it? And I was like, well, you know, I'm really competitive. So it was like, I can do that. I'll try that, you know? And so I eventually, it's funny because I always feel somewhat guilty answering the question of like, how did you break into comics? Because on some level, I broke into comics unintentionally. Right. Which isn't to say that it was effortless, but I didn't take it that seriously. It wasn't a grand plan. It was just a kind of like, ooh, I want to do this next. Ooh, I want to do that next, you know? And all the while with the notion that I was continuing to pursue theater, but then realizing at some point, I haven't auditioned in ages. I don't go to the same readings I used to go to. I write, and now I get paid to write. And, you know, just at some point I realized, oh, this is what I do for a living now. I guess I better take this real seriously.
That's so interesting, because that's, I mean, when you were relaying that, like, I was just feeling that. I'm like, okay, like there's a point, like when the thing that we do, and like you said, there was no intention. It was an opportunity that you were like, oh, that sounds like fun. I mean, because like, as you said, you were doing 19 things just to kind of get by. So this was just another thing, but that thing became a larger and larger slice of the pie without sort of any sort of real sort of like, you know, like, okay, yeah, I'm going to get that bigger thing. I'm going to get a 10-page story next. You know what I mean?
It wasn't effortless, and it wasn't half-assed, but it was never a grand plan. It was just always, I am a high energy, go 1,000% kind of person. I'm very competitive. And so it was just always like being really interested in the thing that was in front of me. But I was only building the thing that was in front of me. It didn't occur to me I was building a career until, you know, at some point I looked up and was just like, oh.
So that was you. Like, was there an external factor? Like, did somebody like say to you, like, were people saying things to you and then you were able to kind of like internalize that? Or was that purely like from your point of view?
No, I mean, I think it was probably when I stopped writing actor on my tax return and wrote writer was when I realized, because, you know, you write actor, even though you're not making, you know, like if you got paid on one job that year, you're like, I'm an actor, damn it, you know? And, you know, even though I was making a lot more money as a writer, my brain didn't make that switch. And then I think at some point, like when I was filling out a tax return, I was like, oh, you're not an actor, you're a writer. That's what you do. It was very surprising to me.
Yeah, well, it's super amazing how that it is amazing how the tax return really is this sort of like codifying element of purpose. You know, in you know, I mentioned my wife's an artist, and like, you know, the years that she's having a very tough time, you know, as an artist, you know, she hates taxes even more, because it's like, how do I justify writing artist on here when I really don't think I made any money, you know? And it's like a real, it's a tough thing.
It's an act of faith.
It is. Yeah, for sure. And habit. So yeah, I mean, like we just kind of do that thing, but that's super interesting that moment hits. So you write it down and you know, I mean, it's like sort of like one of those self-help things. You write down the thing that you know, and now it's like you've made it real. Did that shift your mindset? Did you go, oh, I'm okay, now I'm really gonna like charge into this more so with like sort of an intention?
I don't know that it did. I don't know if I am. I don't know if I'm capable of that. And you know, like it's so hard when to talk about yourself. I think, you know, we all have a certain amount of mirror blindness, you know, like it's just, I will think about something I can say of myself that I'm like, that is true of me. And then as soon as I say it, I can think of like 19 exceptions, you know? And so I want to say like, oh, I'm a planner, but I'm not really good at big picture planning. And well, I can think of some exceptions where that's not really true, but, you know, I like a lot of folks, I got a late in life, ADD diagnosis. And it was helpful in that it made a lot of things make sense for me. You know, I am, very much a radial thinker. Like the good news is it's good for creativity because it's really natural for me to find connections. It's very hard for me to give you a straight answer to a question because my brain goes in 4 directions at once, right? I'm sure that's not a thing that you've noticed in the last hour of our conversation at all. So I'm not concise. You know, I kind of follow a lot of interests, but I can hyper focus on the thing that's right in front of me. And so I don't remember it being like oh, well, now I guess I better change something. It was more of a like, oh, look, it was more like looking back. Like, oh, I've been kind of lying to myself about what I was doing for a while. And I kind of tricked myself into doing this thing by not really looking up and seeing it. And so, but then I kind of went back to, all right, what's the next project I'm really excited about and hyper-focused on? There have been times I have thought in terms of career stuff. You know, I will, when I finished doing Osborne, I remember being like, oh, well, you know, I guess the next thing on this career ladder is to pitch on an ongoing. I should get an ongoing. And then like kind of did some research about what character I thought I should pitch an ongoing for and which ones I thought would, you know, and it was a very unemotional decision-making process. Like, who's a character that doesn't have an ongoing right now that really should have one that I think I could find a connection to in a way. And
yeah,
you know, it's a little bit Machiavellian in its.
I think that's pretty natural. I mean, I think for every project I pitched, it really did come from those points of view. Like, you're looking around at what character you can kind of vibe with, you know, that's not being utilized in the level or at all. So you kind of go, okay, what can I do, and where can you find those sort of plot threads in the historic archive of that character that, you know, to say, okay, you know what, there's that kind of cool thing. Let me see if I can flesh that out. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, so you're Captain Marvel was a big thing in our family, because my niece, who just turned 18 yesterday, and she's great. She is totally the coolest kid. And she was really, really getting into the Marvel movies when they were sort of really kind of becoming a thing. And she was, you know, young teen. And I knew that Captain Marvel was like on the horizon. I'm like, okay, they're going to bring this character in. And she's a young girl, and, you know, she needs to know who this is and what. So, like, I remember buying the trades for your runs and giving them to her. I'm like, okay, read these, because they're going to make sense to you in the future, you know. And she was like, okay, you know, and, you know, she read them, you know, but now for her, like, the character is important to her because she has a connection. So, was that a thing for you? Like, where you were like, oh, like, did you go to them saying, hey, I want to do something with Captain Marvel, or how did that come around for you?
Yeah, that was the book where I was like, okay, I guess I got to pitch on an ongoing. And so, you know, I was like, well, her name is, you know, she was Ms. Marvel at the time. And I was like, her name is Marvel. Yeah. The company's called Marvel. Who's a beautiful blonde toyetic character who doesn't have a book coming out right now. Mm-hmm. And she has an Air Force background. And I grew up on Air Force bases. Oh,
yeah.
Hey, guess what book you should pitch on? You know?
Yeah.
And so you know, I started researching the character and reading a whole bunch of her stuff and kind of finding what was interesting about her to me. And then again, there was no great plan, you know, and in fact, I was absolutely convinced that my ongoing was going to be canceled at 6 issues, like utterly and completely convinced. Really? And I said at one point, I think I said in an early interview, I was like, you know, oh, she'll be back in the black bathing suit, you know, inside the year. Like, you know, this is not going to stick. Relax. Yeah. You know, and here we are. I've never been so happy to be wrong. But yeah, I was so convinced that we would be canceled that I did not have a plan past issue 6. So when we got approved to 12, I had to scramble. Right. There is a 2-issue arc right after the opening 6-issue arc. 7 and 8 are me buying time.
Nice. Vamping.
Yes, to make a plan for the next arc. Exactly, because I just didn't. Yeah. It was inconceivable to me that there would be issues 7 and 8 of that book.
That's so cool that you were like sort of like in that sort of relative fatalistic kind of attitude of like, well, you know, it's gonna, like, I'm glad I got the shot, but
no, and I'm not a pessimistic person, and it didn't bum me out. In fact, it was incredibly liberating. I was like, I'm going to write about everything I'm really interested in writing about, because no one's going to read it. Who cares? You know? Yep. And so, you know, I was like, oh yeah, my first arc, time travel arc, you know, because that's, why not?
Yeah.
Because I wanted to write about the history of women in aviation, and I wanted to write about the Mercury 13. And so, like, time travel arc, that's what we're doing. Ha ha ha. You know, and it wasn't, it was because I wanted to figure out a way to talk about the things that I felt really passionately about and were part of why I connected to the character. And so I just did that. And then somehow, you know, we ended up with 2 successful runs on the book back to back, and then the movie. And I got a note from Tim Leong from Entertainment Tonight, not Entertainment Tonight, sorry, Entertainment Weekly, right after the movie came out. And he said, like, I don't know if you have had a moment to process this or not, but I just want you to take a second and think about the fact that there's going to be a generation of girls for whom this is their favorite superhero and what that means. And it was jaw-dropping, you know, and humbling. And all of a sudden there were little girls in my line at conventions, which I'd had some little girls before, but not like this.
No.
And I would ask them all about the movie and what their favorite parts were. And it was astonishing to me how many of them, okay, so the Flurkin gets a lot of love, which fair.
Sure.
Absolutely fair. But the number of them that would identify the moment in the film that is, to this day, I think, like a wildly important moment when Jan Rog says, you know, all right, you know, this is it, mano a mano, we're going to take each other on hand to hand, put the fireworks away. And I said, when you could beat me with that, you know, then you could really, you beat me. And she just blasts him. And without, you know, these 9, 10, 11-year-old girls, without them being able to articulate why that was important, they responded to that moment very powerfully. And why that moment is important is because what it says is, I am not going to hide my gifts because they don't matter to you, or they make you feel bad, or we have to compete on a level of your ability. I'm going to bring everything I have to the table, whether you are comfortable with it or not. And that is so much of the experience of young womanhood, you know, that I can't bring my whole authentic self to this interaction lest you be, you know, intimidating, or, you know, all the other things that you can be told as a young woman, you know, will put off the comfort of the men around you. And the fact is, I don't think that's true. I don't like, I think that gives men so little credit. I think this is this cultural relic that isn't true for contemporary men or women, you know? And or anyone anywhere else on that gender spectrum, you know? It bums me out to know so many of those girls today, or I guess it's not today, I guess it was like about 5-6 years ago now. But how long ago was it? I don't even know. A few years ago now. Those girls were still having those experiences. That made me sad that they were responding to that, because that remained a truth. But it made me feel hopeful and optimistic that that they got to see on the big screen, you know, with a Oscar-winning actress, superstar Brie Larson, the negation of that idea.
Yeah.
That no, you be you.
Yeah.
And everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, and it's so important, you know, for anybody to see that thing, you know, that example or whatever the example is. We need to be able to see it to know that it's a real thing.
Yeah.
So whatever the thing is, like, you know, if you had, you know, who knows, if you're exposed to writers at an early age, you can go, oh, that's a thing people can do. And then you go, okay, I can do that. Because somebody else could do it, I can do it. And but to be able to see a hero make this gesture, which is a defining gesture.
Yes.
You have this a bit, you now offer that sense of empowerment, and hopefully not just to little girls, but to everybody, to say, hey, you know, don't, because what I'm hearing is you have this moment when you were handed, you know, the reins to this monthly, you know, an ongoing book, and you showed everything. You said, okay, I'm going to show all the gifts. And it's a thing that I've noticed in a lot of new writers is they hold back. There's this thing like where they're like, okay, well, I've got this great big idea, but I'm going to, like, it's going to be a slow burn, or I'm going to work into it or whatever. I'm like, and I'm saying people, like, throw it all, do the thing that you want to do the most, and all of it, put it right out there, because you know, like what in Hamilton, you know, you get your one shot, you know, like, this is it. This is your time. This is your shot. And you take it, because, you know, I keep staring at the sword in the background. Like I played a lot of D&D growing up, but I also did LARPing as growing up. So when you say costuming, like I've made tons of costumes. And I remember I was playing a game by myself. I didn't go off with my friends to do it. And I'm standing in the woods. I had to create this history. And it was just like this great history. And I'm like, and I had this great secret. I was like, ha ha ha, nobody else knows my secret, blah, 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 me. And I'm standing in the woods hiding because this character is in town. And theoretically, if this character saw me, they could kill me. And there was no law that said they couldn't do that. And I stood there and I'm thinking, and I stepped out of myself and I looked at myself hiding in the woods with elf ears on, you know, and I said, what the hell are you doing? There's no story in you hiding for yourself. Go and take your lumps, get punched in the nose, get out there. And I did that. And I had a great time moving forward, you know, because it became the best thing, because I made the story happen. I did, you know, it's like if you read a book and it was like the protagonist, it was always just like, oh, wow, those troopers are really mean to those townsfolk, but I don't want to get involved. I'll just kind of walk around the edge of town and keep on going. Like, there's no story, you know. Yeah. You have to kind of do that thing. So, and I think that's what you did. You got the book, and you're like, I'm going to tell the story that I want to tell.
Yeah.
And that's a huge.
And there's a line, I think it's based on somebody's research, that people on their deathbed don't regret the risks they took. They regret the risks they didn't take.
Yep. Totally. And I think that's what creating it is, you know?
Yeah.
You're going to create it. Your number one task is to put that stuff out there, regardless. But wow. And it all worked out pretty well.
It's so far so good.
So far so good. So let's talk Historia, because this is a pretty big project.
Yeah.
How did it, like, I mean, we talked to Phil and how it came about for him, but how did it start off for you, and what was your sort of, I mean, were you talking to the third grader and yourself at that point?
DC called me and said, we're going to do this Black Label initiative, and would you be interested in pitching on it? And I was like, you know, there's my big areas of interest in DC are Lois Lane, who is maybe my favorite character in all of comics. And so I'm real, like, you kind of want to save something and just be a fan. you know. And so I was like, I don't know that I want to do that. And then there's this like 80s goth B-list character from the Gotham universe. It's called Nocturna. And I was like, oh, okay. Should I just do like a Nocturna thing? And I was like, that is not sales bonanza. The Black Label Nocturna book.
Woo, what?
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's lining up already.
Yes. She's like a vampire, but she's not a vampire, like, and so then it was like, oh, well, Wonder Woman was the thing I was the most into as a kid, but then I had, it was the Amazons. It was like, oh, you know what I really want to do? I really want to do the Amazons, not Wonder Woman, but like the Amazons, and Wonder Woman coming out of that, like, right? Like, and I started thinking about it, and the phrase that I used that always is the one I come back to is I said, what I want to do is a Homerian epic with a woman at the center. And so that's where we come back to this kid that was like the little classics nerd. And so that was what I pitched. I pitched Hippolyta as a Homerian epic hero. So and I pitched big. I pitched 9 64-page issues, which is like over 500 pages of comics if I get to do all 9. DC was like, slow your roll. We're going to approve 3 and we'll see.
Right.
And so I did not squish the 9 into 3. I have done the first 3 of this 9-book project. And if we only ever get to do those 3, I will be content.
Yeah.
They are 64-page issues, so they're we refer to them as books. And I've had a tremendous time working on them. And if it ends here, that's okay. And if I get to do all 9, that will be both a blessing and a curse. And I'm happy either way. But yeah, that was the idea. That was the pitch. We talked artists. I submitted a list of artists, and then Phil Jimenez is like, quintessential Wonder Woman artist. And they called him and sent him the pitch, and he actually politely declined. And then I was so bummed by that I realized I have to, like, oh, this is what I really want him on this. I need to see what I can do. And so I asked if it was okay for me to call him directly. I called him directly. We had a wonderful conversation, and I think he thought about it another day, and then he was in.
Right.
And then I ruined his life.
Yeah, that was kind of the vibe that we got. Well, I mean, like Phil was sort of at that point where he really didn't know what he was going to be doing in comics. Like that's, and so it was a bit of an overwhelming, I think, kind of thought for him.
Yeah. I mean, he had come off of a not great experience. He was a little bummed and a little burned out. And I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. But, remember when I was talking about what I look for in a collaborator, and I'm like, I want somebody that comes to play.
Yeah.
Like Phil comes to play.
Yeah.
Like Phil and I are texting each other literally every day and sending pictures back and forth and talking and reacting to each other's, like, well, what if we did this? Ooh, that's awesome. We're going to do it like this, and then like, and that's what you want.
Because and Phil, learned a whole new thing doing this.
Yeah.
Like he went from being a traditional paper and ink on paper, or pencil and ink on paper, you know, artist to doing this digitally. And that's a huge transition.
Yes.
And the results are just ridiculous. You know, I mean, and I mean, he not only did you drive him crazy, he drove the colorist crazy. I mean, like, but like, I mean, this is one of my favorite things. You know, and but like he like, you know, I mean, I think he found a challenge in this that he didn't expect to find.
Yeah.
And that's quite a testament to what the two of you sort of played with to get there.
Yeah. And you know, and I got not just a creative partner, but a friend, you know, a friend for life now, this guy.
He's great. He's such a good person. I remember we were talking to Gene, and Gene's like, he's like, I have such a hurdle to, you know, just even to knock my head against. He said it's so high.
No, poor Gene. Like, I mean, and poor Gene is a ridiculous thing to say, because
I know, right, because it's just Gene,
phenomenally gifted, right? And like the most professional dude.
Yeah.
That, you know, like, just like dependable and articulate, like always lets you know where he is and what he's thinking, and like just consummate professional, and brings just guns blazing talent, you know. So the idea that anything would be like, you know, oh, poor Gene, like, that's ridiculous. But that said, I also don't think he had any idea what he was getting into.
Well, it's so dense. Like, I mean, it's super, super dense.
And Phil took 4 years to draw that.
I mean,
right? And so Gene's doing it in a fraction of that amount of time. Nice. But he's still working with Phil's designs. So you still got, like, okay, so he doesn't have to design those 30 Amazons. They're already designed, but he still has to draw every antler. Right? Like, you know,
all the things tied to the belts. Everything is, it is.
And then come up with a way to take these incredibly specific Phil things, you know, and how does Gene take that and make it his own? Because to just, you know, it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be honoring the work it wouldn't be honoring his talent.
Right.
For Gene to be doing, oh, well, let me just try to channel Phil.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it has to be like, all right, what do I bring of the Gene artistic vision, and what are the things in here that speak to me? And, you know, and he like really makes the comedy work in the book, which is a fun, you know, the first book is very heavy. All of the comedy is very dry in the first book. In the second book, there's a scene where the Amazon queens are kind of playfully bantering with one another, and it's not quite silly, but it's funny.
Yeah.
You know, and there's like a moment where, you know, the queen of the of Hecate's tribe is like looking at this woman, you know, and Hecate's tribe, like, they have these very strange gold masks that are their faces. Like, there's no face underneath there. You can't take the mask off, and they're spiky and you know, kind of frightening looking. And she's like all up in this woman's face, and then Helene, who's the queen of Athena's tribe, rather, you know, says something about what they're going to do with the women, and Minalippe is like, you know, oh, you're scaring them, and Helene is like, oh, it's me, I'm scaring them, you know, like, and when she's up, like, and like she makes this, or Jean rather makes this play, like it's like the sarcasm and the wit and the fun between them plays.
He's pulling off the acting on the page.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's a great talent. I mean, not every penciler artist, you know, can really do idiosyncratic, you know, sort of acting with characters. It's not it's not a common thing. And
or they all three artists of this book are very good at that, and they're each really good at it in a very different way. Nicola is able to do a kind of subtlety and nuance that's really hard to draw.
Okay. Yeah.
But she nails it. Like the level of the performance, like the simmering of it is like, oh damn.
Yeah.
You know?
I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
I can't wait to see Jean's stuff either. When does Jean's issue come out? Do you know?
I think it's April 5th.
Okay, wow, so really close.
Yeah. And the variant cover for that book is Becky Cloonan. We had Olivier Coipel do a variant for book 1, and Becky Cloonan did a variant for book 2, and it's I'm hoping we get to show it sometime very soon, because maybe by the time this goes up, we'll be able to link to it or something. But it's astonishing. She did Demeter for her cover, and it's just jaw-dropping.
Oh man, she can lay it down, like it's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, a big fan of that. Wow. So these are big things, but like, do you have anything else you want to talk about that you're working on? That
the biggest project in my life right now, besides Historia, is actually something that I am not allowed to talk about quite yet, which is a bit of a bummer, but I believe that I will be allowed to start talking about it sometime in April.
Okay.
So,
and would that be something people can expect this year or next year?
This year.
Okay, good. Yay, that's exciting. Yeah, well, it's I mean, it's very hard. I mean, we live in this sort of cycle-driven environment now that people pay attention to comic books. You know, 30 years ago, no one would care. But you know, I guess we're very fortunate that people do care.
Yes, indeed.
And it's no small thing. Yeah, I could probably talk to you all afternoon, because there's many other things I'd like to talk about, but I'm going to let you go.
We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll get the whole lot of you on and have
that would be fun.
Historia map up.
I would love that idea.
Yeah, we could get a bunch of disgruntled colorists, and because you have Clayton lettering. Was Clayton lettering?
Clayton Cowles lettering. And now Clayton is used to my nonsense. Yeah, Clayton and I have worked together for years and years.
Yeah, so good.
And he tolerates me admirably. The colorists are going to come gunning for all of us.
Oh, yeah, there's going to be some sort of moment. But it's okay. Okay, quick question.
The flatters. Can you imagine? I don't even.
Yeah.
Not even the colorists, the flatters. If I get pulled into an alley someday, it was the flatters.
Yeah, right. Because there's a lot of stuff, and nobody's leaving anything off of these pages. Like it is really kind of crazy. Quick question.
Yeah.
What are you reading? Are you reading anything that's knocking you out right now? Books? Anything that's just
I am reading a lot of nonfiction right now. I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of nonfiction that's like goofy self-improvement stuff, and then I read a lot of nonfiction that is research related. I just downloaded audiobook of John Darnielle's new novel. What is the name of it? Oh, I can't look it up on my phone because
you're using your phone.
My phone is my camera. But I haven't started it. I just downloaded it last night. So
Double House?
That's it. Yes.
Google.
Yes. So I just grabbed that and I'm really excited to start that. Let's see, comics that have knocked my socks off. Cliff Chang's Catwoman book. Are you reaching for it?
I just picked it up yesterday. I've been out of town for a while, so I went to Comic Envy here in Asheville, and they pulled out the copy. I didn't even ask them to save me, but they've been pulling it off on the side.
Oh, that's nice. That's how you know you got a good shop, when they know.
Yeah. I keep saying this book that Cliff is doing is the ultimate flex. He's showing. I mean, it's just him, just one person. Crazy.
Oh, he's just so extraordinary. He's so extraordinary.
A really amazing person.
Yes. Yeah. And like very much a gentleman, much a gentleman, which I like, you know, and I'm 1,000 times in the tank. But my husband continues to be my favorite comic book writer. So it's Matt Fraction. And, you know, I think he's just the best going. I really do. And like, I understand that I'm super biased in that regard, but I think he just thinks about the comic form worlds away from any of the rest of us. And I thought November was extraordinary. I think Adventure Man is fantastic. He also just has incredible collaborators. You know, I'm dying for Casanova to come back with Ba and Moon, just because there's a chemistry between the three of them that's really, really phenomenal. You know, I remain a huge fan of Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka and Brian Bendis, who are all good friends of ours and all have great work coming out right now.
Yeah, I mean, I say it over and over again, like we are living in a golden age of comics that are being produced. The variety is unbelievable, and at the level that it's being done is just, you know, I mean, thank the heavens for the giants whose shoulders we all stand on.
Oh, true.
Because they smashed everything out, so we could, you know, we as a cumulative population create something so wonderful. So,
you know what I haven't read yet that I'm like dying to get to, and I'm looking at my shelves, even though I know it is not here, because because I've asked a couple times, like, oh, we need to, you know, do we have any copies of this? The Many Deaths of Lila Starr, I missed.
Right.
And I hear just fantastic buzz on that book. It's Philippe Andrade, who I got to work with on Captain Marvel, who I adore. And I think Ram V wrote it. And I've just been hearing wonderful, wonderful things about the book. I have not read it yet, and it's so cool killing me.
Yeah.
So that's probably, as soon as I can get a hold of it, will be the next big one for me.
Cool. Awesome.
All right.
It's always fun reading stuff.
All right.
Yep. Well, Kelly Sue, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
While in the making, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this. Follow Kelly Sue, one word, on Twitter, milkfest.us. You can find her. She's out there making great stuff. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.